Let me read our passage today. It's from Luke 16, verse 19 to 31. If you want to follow along on the screens, you can. You can open your Bibles on your apps. You can follow along wherever you please. And I'll be reading from the NIV. So let's hear the word. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried in Hades, where he was in torment. He looked up and saw Abraham far, far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you are a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us." He answered, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them." "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone came from the dead goes to them, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." So as you have noticed, over the last couple of weeks, we've been going through some of the parables of Jesus. And we titled our series, "The Chronicles of the Kingdom," because the parables reveals to us something of God's kingdom. Now, parables are complicated. They're meant to be ambiguous and layered with nuances and meaning. They're not very clear from the outset, and they're designed to make you think. They're designed to call you into a deeper contemplation, if you like. Parables are meant to challenge listeners to think deeply, engage their imagination, and to seek further understanding. And those who are genuinely interested and willing to learn, to pursue deeper meanings, will do so. They will find it. But then we have also people who are dualistic in our thinking, who have the answer before we already arrived. You know the type. They will not try. They will dismiss story as beating around the bush or trying to evade the so-called truth. But this is what Jesus did. To every time someone tried to catch him into a snare, he would tell a story, not a truth statement. He would, as some would say, beat around the bush. But again, in his stories, they are layered with meaning, ambiguity, and truths that are deeper than just superficial, surface-level truth. Remember, Jesus calls us into this deeper reflection when we approach this parable this morning. And when it comes to the story of Lazarus and the rich man, I have to touch on the fact that it has often been misunderstood and preached mainly as a warning of afterlife judgment or hellfire judgment after we die, where the emphasis have been laid throughout church history. And this is, especially in the West, and this is a common understanding of the passage, but this kind of emphasis falls apart when you start exploring the passage in both its literary context and its historical context. So, just want to see if there we go. And so this, what do I mean by literary context? It's a fancy word for saying what Jesus was responding to. So looking at the story right before it, what prompted Jesus to tell the story? Historical context is just to understand the world that Jesus' people, that the audience of Jesus lived in. So it's understanding the words that, what did they understand by the words that Jesus was using? So in order to move forward and understand this parable, and before we can apply it to ourselves, we first have to see what Jesus was responding to, how his first audience understood it, and then we can apply it to us. Does that make sense? So, literary context. What was Jesus responding to? So why do I think this popular understanding of this passage kind of falls a little bit apart? Well, for one, if you look at what why Jesus was telling this story, then we see that he told it in response to the Pharisees mocking him for the comments about money and wealth that he made. Look at the verses preceding this parable. In Luke 16, verse 14 to 15, Jesus was just telling the story about how you cannot serve two masters, God and money. And then we read in verse 14 to 15 that the Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. He said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight." And then Jesus breaks into this parable. So, what is more likely, Jesus emphasizing how the rich treat the poor, or afterlife judgment? Now, if the literary context isn't enough for us to see how this breaks apart, this common understanding, then let's look at the historical context, how Jesus' audience would have understood him. So, in the New Testament, we have this word Hades, and this is the word that was used in this parable. And Hades is very similar to the Old Testament conception of Sheol. And Sheol was basically a term used for the land of the dead. Both righteous and unrighteous went there. And it's the same with Hades in the New Testament. That this common understanding of the afterlife. And this is the word that Jesus chooses to use in this parable. So in the New Testament, we have these two words. And if we look at the King James Version, this is where the confusion, I think, crept into the church, is because the King James Version translated Hades in this passage as hell. And so there came the emphasis then of afterlife judgment versus present life living. And when it comes to the word Hades, the most authoritative like New Testament dictionary called the BDAG, it's like this long German name. Also, it consolidates all the different meanings of what the Greek words mean in ancient literature around the time as well, and it consolidates the meaning. And with Hades, it does correlate to Sheol more than it does to another word that they use in the New Testament for hell is Gehenna. So what we have in this parable is Hades. It's better understood as a place of death. So Jesus wasn't trying to make a statement of the destination or location as much as he was making a statement of that he died. And so Jesus wasn't telling a story to place an emphasis on the afterlife judgment or destination. The emphasis Jesus made was in light of the literary and historical context, lies but instead with how we choose to live, how we live now in our current lives. Jesus wasn't responding to these Pharisees who were mocking him for challenging their assumptions about wealth. Jesus was responding to the Pharisees who were mocking him for their views on wealth. Because they believed that if you were rich and if you had all the good things, health, prosperity, then you were blessed by God. Whereas if you were poor and didn't have much, then you were cursed by God. And so social wealth and status was very much intertwined into the religious mindset. And, you know, it's not so much different from how we choose to live today, how we live. We also tend to see value and apply value and honor to people who have means, who are rich and who have power. Almost as if our income bracket determines our moral and ethical conduct. Does that make sense? Do you relate? I remember when I went to the States in about 2017. My wife is from America, and I was working months in advance to save up to go and propose to my wife, who's American. And when we were there, we had the privilege of going to Chicago. And I took that photo right there. We chose to go, I'm a pretty good photographer. But I chose that day to go, one of those days we chose to go to this Trump Tower. And as we walked into this, look at that building, it's just absolutely beautiful. And as we walked into this building, we just came into this massive foyer. Before that, we walked past this line of luxury vehicles. It doesn't even come close to like Porsche or Ferrari. These were like high-end stuff. As we walk into the foyer of this building, we see this harp that is probably like a story high, and this lady just playing this harp, and it's just this most majestic music throughout the place. And you see very important people everywhere littered across this place. And we actually saw someone walk past us like, look, there's Don Jr. It's like Donald Trump's son, busy having a very important business meeting in the corner there. But the one thing that stood out for me was, the memory that struck me was like when I walked in there with my shorts, my holiday shirt, and my pluckies, I felt like I was wearing pajamas at a wedding. I felt out of place. I did not belong there. This was not I didn't belong in this context. And my point with this is that naturally we ascribe, even when we don't fit in with the upper bracket, we ascribe kind of value and goodness based on social wealth and income, right? We all can relate to that, if you're poor or if you're rich. Now, this is what Jesus was getting out in this parable. We ascribe value and worth, and in a sense, because that was what the Pharisees also did. They ascribed value and worth to our social status. Blessing on those who have and curses on those who don't. But Jesus knew back then, what we still know today, is that wealth is often, or very often, built on corruption and predatory practices, right? The reason I chose this example of the Trump Tower is because I think the idea of Trump as an ethical man is quite ludicrous. We just saw him recently being found guilty of, I think, 34 charges of covering up hush money that he paid to a porn star in order to safeguard his 2016 election. He's a grimy figure. Shark, if you like, a business shark. And yet he maintains many people's respect. And I think he stands a very good chance of becoming the American president again. And the church supports him in America. It baffles me. Now, before I go on with this, please don't hear me say that if you are wealthy or if you have means that you are necessarily evil or that you illicitly obtained all of that wealth or that you are inherently bad. Jesus wasn't making that point. I'm not making that point now. So just to get that out of the way. What I am talking about is what Jesus emphasized in this parable is that we have this internal instinct where we apply value to each other based on our social income. I don't even have to know you, but if you drive a nice car, I'm going to trust you. But if I don't know you, and I see you drive a Skadompa or then our society helps us to not trust you, to be suspicious of you. Which brings us back to our parable. In response to the Pharisees who ascribed blessings to wealth and curses to poverty, we see Jesus reversing the roles. See, when you read this parable, we see Jesus he intentionally names Lazarus in the story. That was unheard of. He's a person on the street, sitting at the gates. He's not wealthy in any means. He was not respected. He had no dignity in his context. And Jesus gives him a name in the story. And then, the rich man is the rich man. We don't know who he is. Jesus reverses the fortunes of Lazarus and the rich man because he's showing the rich man, who is the Pharisees that he's talking to at the moment, that they need to bring themselves down and elevate the ones that they have diminished. And sometimes when you think you're up here, but you're actually here, and you think you're down here and you're actually here in the middle, you need to be brought up in order to be in the middle. And if you think you're up here, you need to be brought down. And when you're being brought down, it doesn't feel nice. And this is where the Pharisees are. And this is what Jesus is trying to show them. So in response to the Pharisees who ascribed blessings to wealth and curses to poverty, we see Jesus reversing the roles and placing value on those that were always ignored, those on the margins, those who are socially ostracized and rejected by society. Jesus does this by intentionally naming Lazarus and leaving the rich man unnamed. And as we go into the judgment side of the passage, we see Lazarus rests in peace, whereas the rich man lives in torment, right? The emphasis on judgment here is not on the destination as much as it is on the rich man's posture, on the rich man's attitude towards Lazarus. And this is the point Jesus is making. Even in his torment, he thinks he's better than Lazarus, more valuable than Lazarus, more important than Lazarus. He's better. Look at this passage, look at verse 24 in chapter 16. The rich man begs Abraham to have pity on him and to send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and to cool his tongue. What is wrong with that? He's still sending Lazarus around like he's a servant of his. He does not understand it, that he has changed. He's in his judgment. He still doesn't get the point why he can't bring himself to see. He's not understanding what the source of his judgment is. Why is he feeling so frail? He's still thinking of Lazarus as primarily existing to serve him. This is the point Jesus was making to these Pharisees, that they are no better than those who are poor and despised, including Jesus who was poor and despised. You see, the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu got this when he said, "My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together." My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. When I think I'm better than you, when I elevate myself as better than someone else, then I dehumanize that person, but I also dehumanize myself, because I'm putting myself at a level that I'm not created at. I wasn't created to be better than anyone else. And if I think I'm lesser, then I do the same thing. And then this vicious cycle of dehumanization that goes on. And our world loves this thing. We love it. A good example of this in our country is we still have this apartheid psychology that dominates our thinking sometimes, and how we treat people and how we engage with one another. Steve Biko was really good when he pointed out that we have this kind of hierarchy thing, where we have this huge population who elevates themselves, and we have a huge population that devalues themselves. But we need to be brought to see each other, like what Desmond Tutu was saying there, to see each other as human, because we can only be human together. I often see when I go to fill up my car, I meet these older gentlemen, black gentlemen who fill my car, and they could be older than my dad would have been, and they still treat me like I am better, that I'm like their boss, or they'll call me boss, or they'll call me, you know what I mean? This is the problem of being down here. We need to see each other here. We can't treat ourselves, expect to be treated like we're up here. And this is the point. We humans love creating these social hierarchies. We love to create us and them categories. We love to create better than thou categories. This is the case in our history in South Africa and in our living at the moment. And it was the case with the Pharisees in the New Testament. And this is what Jesus is getting at. You see, this is the main thrust of the story that you read in light of what Jesus was responding to. He wasn't saying if you're rich, you're bad. He was saying if you think you're up here and you need to be treated like a master, then you miss the point of being human. Now the judgment of that rich man where he's sitting in is his inability to live in the harmony of God's loving design. It's similar to the older brother and the prodigal son, where the older brother can't go in to celebrate his brother's return. He's sitting out there in his own anguish and anger, resentment and hate. He cannot bring himself to, and the rich man cannot bring himself to be equal to Lazarus. He still sends him around as a servant. Our humanity is dependent on one another's humanity. The rich man's humanity is dependent on Lazarus' humanity. And C.S. Lewis beautifully illustrates this kind of torment, this kind of judgment that the rich man finds himself in. He says, you can call it hell if you want. He says, I willingly believe that the damned are in one sense successful rebels to the end, that the doors of hell are locked on the inside. That the damned are in a sense successful rebels to the end. You see, this rich man is a rebel to natural order. He's a rebel to how God created us because he wants to hold himself up here. And so Lewis brilliantly explains this kind of torment that the rich man finds himself in. He argues that those who end up in hell are there by their own choice. They have chosen to rebel and reject living in the loving grain of God's love, thus locking themselves up in their own torment. I often think of someone like Hitler. I used this example in my previous sermon. I often think of Hitler going to a Jewish person's wedding, a thing that is beautiful and meant to be celebrated, but I think that would be hell for a person like Hitler. This is the kind of thing we're looking at here. You see, it becomes easier when we think about these parables as mere afterlife things, because it kind of exempts us from here. But this is where it's important. What we do here is important. The way we live here is important. This is what Jesus keeps coming back to in his parables. We think that if I said the sinner's prayer, or if I live right, or have the right beliefs, then we are sorted. But this is to miss the point. The point that Jesus was making was meant to cut deep into our hearts. And that is that in God's kingdom, everyone is created in His image, and thus are objects of His love. And we cut ourselves off from God's love when we internalize the politics of this world that says, I am better than you because I have more toys than you. It's funny, we went to my wife's family holiday cabin, and there was a mug there. It's a very capitalistic mug. It's like, you win when you have the most toys. You think that the life is not that game, you know. We win when we see each other and we love one another. When we do what Jesus says, the two most important commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And the second is as important. Not less or more, is to love one another as ourselves. This is what we are called into. This is the kingdom of God. This is living in God's politics. But our world will want us to ostracize one another, cut each other off for all our differences. And so this is how we go from seeing this parable as a teaching on judgment and get to the core of the justice of God's kingdom, which means we see each other. We look at each other and we see ourselves. We see our brothers, our sisters, our mothers, our fathers. And we love one another as we love ourselves.